Okay, let's move on to 6F, discuss and approve superintendent's evaluation process. And I think let's just open this up to board discussion here right now and see what.
Well, I'm the one that's sort of pushing all this simply because I'm trying to make it easier. And since we only deal, it's just human nature. You can go back and say, what did I do last January or February? And you have a hard time recalling that. And it deals with, quote, working with the community, managing operations, improving the educational process, developing staff personnel, working with the board, and yes, that's exactly the whole thing, and it deals with inside those parameters that the law has...
It does meet the 6 criteria for
the criteria that we have, and I have extras here if you want to...
That instrument is exactly the same instrument that Walled Lake U Auburn used for 2 or 3 years in a row and protested it because of the length of it, and it's all narrative. I mean, it's fine, but it's exactly what we've... And 2 years ago, SAC used it.
I'll look at it.
Anybody want extra?
Well, I don't know. The only thing, and I'll say it again, I said it last month, what we used last year was a lot of narrative, and Barb ended up with a list of things that she either did well or needed to improve on that was pages long. So I don't know. I think it was extremely hard to sort out what the relevant points out of both the good and the bad was because it was so long.
What's required by law is that it's a 3-year cycle, just like teachers in our districts are in a 3-year cycle. And it's required for principals that there be 2 years of what's called a more informal process and one that's a formal evaluation. So whenever you decide to start the 3-year cycle, you do a formal evaluation, and the other 2 years could be something like we talked about at the SAC board meeting last month, which was to take the goals, which you have in front of you, and ask me to speak to the joint boards about what part have I played, where are we with these goals, because that is part of what I'm to report to you. And Dave, I'm not arguing with you at all about what you've suggested, but there are 2 things we have to be careful of. Number 1, you can do a summative evaluation of me every year if you want. You're required to do one every 3 years. And the criteria for the summative has to be based on the criteria for the state law, which is the Iowa School Administrator Standards. And those are the only things that we just have to be careful about. And I'm not going to try to influence you about how you do it.
The only thing I'm just trying to do is trying to get our memory going one after year after year after year and make it easier for us. And then I'm afraid if we do it once every 3 years, it's too distant.
And use it. It'd be nice if you could use... I work for a board. They evaluate me every year. We use a consistent evaluation form because it's easier for us to see if there's improvement or whatever. So
well,
it's nice to be able to use something.
One of these things that Dave handed out had like a timeline and action. It was this Harmony one. And I thought some of those were valuable. Just the fact that maybe in the fall, that the evaluation forms talk about in the fall instead of talked about for tomorrow. And then you've got some time to dwell on it. I think also too they talk about quarterly the superintendent makes progress reports to the board on how the district goals are coming.
Does theirs look like this?
I can't see. Let me get my glasses on.
Doesn't matter.
It's this one right here.
Yep, that comes right straight from...
Yeah, and see, I've got no problem with having a timeline, and I guess maybe dishing it out in pieces, as opposed to. And I'm talking about the timeline. I'm not talking about the form, because right now it seems like we just slam bang and it's over, and and the goals should be, and I have no doubt, believe it or not, intertwined with what the school goals are.
Well, and those 6 areas that are required by law are shared vision, culture of learning, management, family and community, and ethics. Whoops, there's a 6th one. That was 5. Societal context. And so those are the 6 areas that a superintendent in Iowa has to be evaluated on. And as long as the instrument evaluate those 6 areas. But the instrument that I have in front of me, which is part of like the packet that you have, is exactly what a couple of them that Dave has shown us are. So,
If I were setting this up myself, I would ask the superintendent to come before a joint session, report on those 6 areas where they felt they were, and then by next meeting, I would have to come back with a narrative, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs evaluating that person.
And see, I would add to that, Chuck, that those 6 areas, how they relate to our district goals. You know, I mean, that those 6 areas, but it's our district goals that are the thing that should be part of the thing guiding it.
Yeah, that will be part of her report,
Well,
and consequently, it should be part of how I write my report, my evaluation.
I think we're saying the same thing, aren't we?
I would say most of our goals probably fit in one of those areas. I can't imagine they wouldn't fit in any of those areas.
they all do.
Mhm.
Either the goals that were jointly developed and/or our school improvement goals all fit in here.
And of course, the reason why I get on this, because it has above average, average, and below average, and of course, all that business in it, but it gives you some comments you put in there, and it formulates a discussion. Anyway, it's pretty good, as I see it.
So where do we go from here? I mean, we've talked about this for a couple months, 3. I mean, I think we need to come to some sort of conclusion together, what tool we're using, and progress.
Well, what is the timeline we're working on, Chris?
Well, I think, last year, we did evaluation in June.
I want to say probably June. but
June
I'd have to go
sometime?
back and look.
I'd have to look through the date, but I think it was June is when evaluation was done.
Well, instead of each of us doing our own thing, which sometimes, writing narrative or comments is kind of hard, but, I'd rather see some kind of a discussion as a group on, maybe get some dialogue back and forth on goods and bads, and I just think some evaluations are extremely difficult when you have to write narrative about things that you may have limited knowledge about. That's kind of why I recommended that Barb talk about our goals and where we're at, because, we might not necessarily know where we're at. We may think we do, but we may be way off.
I could come into a discussion with the 2 boards sitting in on it, with Barb, and at the end of that, walk out of there and feel that she was evaluated and never put a thing to paper, never write a comment. If I had a comment, I'd make it in that open session.